We start the Gemara today, Chav Gimel Amud Beis, where it says Neime Ketanoi. The Gemara before brought a machlekes between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan regarding Haitzah Sadeshen and Arama Sadeshen. The machlekes was by Haitzah Sadeshen, it said that it's not considered to be an Aveda. You don't have to wear the big day kohuna when you take out the ashes all the way outside of the machna. That was done once in a while, when there was too much ashes on the Mizbeach. Then there's Harama Sadeshen. Harama Sadeshen was every single morning, there was a certain measure of ashes, as the Gemara will soon say how much, that they took out and placed on the side of the Mizbeach. The argument is that considered to be an Aveda? Right? So Reish Lakish says that it's not, because in the Pasuk it says they only wear two begodim, the Mechnesayim and the Ksaynes. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says, no, it's considered to be an Aveda, and the Kohen has to wear all of his garments when he does this Aveda. So the Gemara here brings a machlokes Tanaim and says, it seems seemingly that this is also a machlokes Tanaim. Sagt the Gemara Neime Ketanoi, shall we say that this is an argument between Tanaim? It says in Abraisa, Al Besarai, when it said there in the Pasuk that you have to wear V'lavash HaKayim Midibad, and Michnas Yabad Yilbash, Al Besarai. So it could have said that he wears it Al Besarai. The word Yilbash is extra. Mat Talmud Loimar Yilbash. Why does it say a second time Yilbash? It said in the beginning of the Pasuk, V'lavash. So it says again, Yilbash. So what it teaches me is, Lahavi mitznefes v'avneit. So the first opinion in this brayse is that you have to have not only the ksaynes and the mechnesayim that I mentioned clearly in the pasuk, but also the hat and the gartel also have to be worn laharama when you take off the ashes. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's why it says the second time Yilbash. Rabbi Daisa says, this word Yilbash here is actually connected to another place in the Torah where it writes Yilbash, which is by the begodim of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. L'rabbis, big day Kohen Gadol b'Yoma Kippurim. This is coming to tell you that the clothing that the Kohen Gadol wore on Yom Kippur, sheksheirim l'Kohen Hedyot, that after Yom Kippur it could be worn by a Kohen Hedyot. It's the same begodim that a Kohen Hedyot wears every day, and therefore a Kohen Hedyot could wear it later on. So it says Yilbash here by Harama Sadeshen, and it also says the word Yilbash over there regarding the big day Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. So we compare the two and say that it's coming to tell you that Kohen Hedyot can wear it. So Rabbi disagrees. Rabbi has a third interpretation of what this Yilbash is coming to teach. First, Rabbi explains why he disagrees with Rabbi Daisa's opinion. Amar Rabbi, so Rabbi said, Shtei Tshuvas B'Dava. I have two answers why you can't say like Rabbi Daisa. One answer is the Kohen Gadol loizeu avneitish Kohen Hedyot. The gartel of the Kohen Gadol is not the same quality as the gartel of the Kohen Hedyot. And this is Rabbi's opinion. We learned about this before because Rabbi says that the gartel of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur was made just out of linen, and the gartel of the Kohen Hedyot is made out of wool and linen, klayim. So it's not even the same. For another reason why you can't say like Rabbi Daisa, begodim shenishtamashta ben kedusha chamura, the garments that were used for a higher level of Kedusha. On Yom Kippur, tishtamish ben Kedusha kala. Now you're going to use it for a lower level of Kedusha for the Kohen Hedyot every day. So therefore, according to Rabbi, matamad loima yilbash, when the Torah here says an extra word of yilbash, what is it teaching me? L'rabbis es hashchokim. Comes to say, even clothing that are very worn out could also be worn for the Aveda. Rashi here says, as long as it's not torn. If it's worn out, it could still be worn for the Aveda in the Beis HaMikdash. Not only regarding Arama Sadeshen, but according to Rashi, it's talking about any Aveda in the Beis HaMikdash. Yeah. The Mefarshim, by the way, say that the Rebbe had the Taina over here against Rab Daisa. So the first one, we know what Rab Daisa answers. Rab Daisa holds that the gartel of the Kohen Hedyot is the same as the gartel of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur because he holds that it's all made out of plain linen. It's not kalayim. But the second point he made, that how do you go down in Kedusha? There's always the klal that mailim bekedusha. In Kedusha you go up, you don't go down. So does the Rabbi Daisa not agree to this? So the answer is because this clothing of the Kohen Gadol can't be used again anyways. What's the other option to do with it? As we'll see over here, the Gemara will say the other option is it's just going to have to be buried. So in such a case where you're not going to be able to use it, here Rabbi Daisa says, even though usually you don't want to use it for less of a Kedusha, but it's better than burying it. At least it should be used by the Kohen Hedyot. Whereas Rabbi says, no, you don't want it to go down, and therefore you have to burying it, as the Gemara here says. V'hinicham sham. This is the pasuk that it says regarding the begodim that the Kohen Gadol wore in Yom Kippur. It says you place it there. What is the Torah telling you? So one opinion is malamet shatun and geniza. This teaches me that it has to be buried. Basically, you can't use it again. Rabbi Daisa says ru'uyin hein l'Kohen Hedyot. it could be worn by the Kohen Hedyot. So what does it mean when it says that you should put it there? All it's saying is that the Kohen Gadol shouldn't use it again next year Yom Kippur. But a Kohen Hedyot could use it. So, after this whole Braise, the Gemara now comes back to what we were saying here, that you see here two opinions in the beginning of the Braise regarding the Yilbash. So the Gemara says, my love, Bahaka Miflagi, doesn't it seem like that the Machlokes here is as follows? Mar Savar Avaidihi. So one opinion that says that it's coming to tell you, the Yilbash is coming to say that when you take off the ashes, you have to wear also the Mitznefes and the Avnit. You're wearing all four big day kahuna. It's because he holds a Rama Sadeshen is part of the Aved in the Beis HaMikdash. Mar Savar, the opinion that says that Yilbash comes to tell you a different halacha, that you can use the begadim of the Kohen Gadol of Yom Kippur every day, but you don't have to wear the more than the Michnasayim and the Ksainas. So he holds Lav Avedihi. It's not an Aveda. So this is the argument that we had before. So the Gemara says, Loi. No, that's not how you understand this, but I say, the Kulal Avedihi. Everybody agrees that when you take off the ashes, it's an Aveda, and you have to wear all four big day kahuna. Here the argument is as follows. One opinion is you need an extra word to teach this to me. Because the Torah only said clearly that you wear the Michnasayim and the Ksainas, you need an extra pasuk to teach me that you also have to wear the hat and the gartel. The Rabuya, so you need that extra pasuk. The other opinion says, once the Torah says that you wear the pants, the Michnasayim and the Ksainas, it's self-understood that you have to wear the Mitznefes and the Avnit as well. You don't need a special pasuk for that. So everybody agrees it's an Aveda. The argument is whether you need a special pasuk to clarify, to teach me that or not. There's a Sikha where the Rebbe talks about this whole Indian of Arama Sadeshen and Eitzah Sadeshen, and the Rebbe says that the reason why these Avedas are different than all the Avedas in the Beis HaMikdash, and the Gemara has all discussion about it, is because all the Avedas in the Beis HaMikdash are done inside the Beis HaMikdash, bringing the Karbanis on the Mizbeach. Here, we're talking about the ashes that are sort of the leftovers, that they do not get consumed and elevated Lamaila. You take them off the Mizbeach, and then you have ones that you put at the side of the Mizbeach, and there's the ones that you take all the way outside. So the Rebbe says, same thing you have today, davening is in the place of karbanis. So there's the davening and the learning itself, which is like the Aveda that's done inside the Beis HaMikdash, what you bring onto the Mizbeach. But then there's what does not get consumed and go up on the Mizbeach. And in Aveda today, what that refers to is the things that a person does in Gashmias that he takes off of the Mizbeach, away from the Mizbeach, outside of the shul, in his business, eating, drinking, whatever else it may be in Gashmias. And in this, there are two levels. There's Harama Sadeshen, there's what you do in Gashmias that's more closely related to your davening and learning. And that's the lashon of the pasuk Kol Derachecha De'eyu, the things that you do that you clearly have the das of the Eibishter, the awareness of the Eibishter and what you're doing. And then there's Kol Masechel L'Shem Shemayim, things that are even further out, like Hitzah Sadeshen that you take all the way out of the Beis HaMikdash, that it's done for the sake to be used later l'shem shemayim, but it's not so closely connected to kedusha. So therefore, the Gemara is having a discussion here regarding these kinds of avedas. Are they part of the aveda in the Beis HaMikdash? Are they not? Because this is not really the aveda of the carbon itself. It's not within kedusha itself. This refers to the aveda that's done in the gashmius of the world, and that's why there's an argument about this here in the Gemara. So the Gemara Vaita begins a new Indian over here regarding the Arama Sadeshen. Boy Rabavin asked, Truma Sadeshen, taking off the ashes of the Mizbeach, Bekama. How much? How much ashes do you take off by Arama Sadeshen? Mit Trumas Maisi Alfinan Lot. Do you learn it out from Trumas Meiser? And the amount of Trumas Meiser is a tenth. This is the Meiser. A Levi receives Meiser, and then he has to take off a tenth from that Meiser and give to the Kayin. Is that where you learn it out from? Or mit Trumas Midyan Yalfinan Lot. Or you learn it out from Trumas Midyan. This is in Parshas Matos. When the Yidden went out to a war with Midyan, they came back with a bunch of spoils. So then they gave 1 of 500 to the Beis HaMikdash, or to the Kainim. So is it over here as well 1 of 500, or is it 1/10? It's a huge difference. Taisus over here points out that really the Gemara could have learned out from other cases, maybe from Truma, from why are we learning out Dafke from Trumas Meiser? So Taisus says, because by Trumas Meiser, it uses a similar lashon to what it says here, because it says there, Vahare Moisem, similar to the lashon of Trumas Adeshen. And the same by Trumas Midyan, it uses the term Vahare Moisa. So that's why those are the two places where the Gemara is thinking that you could learn out how much the amount is. Tashama, so the Gemara answers and brings actually that in a Braisa it says that it's none of these two. The Tanya Rab Chia says, Nemakan, over here in the Pasuk it says, Veheirim, you should remove, you should take off. V'nem ala alon, and then there's another Pasuk by a Korban Mincha where it says, Veheirim, same word. Mala alon bekumtzai, just like by every Mincha, how much do you take off of a Mincha to burn on the Mizbeach? A little fistful, that a kaimitz. Afkan bekumtzai. So too over here, when you take off from the ashes, you take off a kaimitz. So Rashi explains, it doesn't literally mean that the person sticks in his hand and he takes off an actual kaimitz. You're going to burn yourself. The ashes could still be hot. But it means that the person should estimate when he takes off with a shovel that it should be at least the amount of a kaimitz, which is really a tiny amount. That's how much the whole thing of Arama Sadeshan is. Omar Rav, now Rav said, the Nu Aloche, Arba Avaidis, there are 4 Avaidis in the Beis HaMikdash, Zor Chayiv Alei Misa. A Zor, a person that's not a Kayin that does them, will be Chayiv Misa. What are they? Zrike, spraying the blood on the Mizbeach, Haktara, burning the parts on the Mizbeach, Nisach HaMayim, pouring the water on the Mizbeach, V'nisach HaYayin, and pouring the wine on the Mizbeach. Levi Amar, Levi adds and says, Af Trumas Hadeshin. This Aveda of removing the ashes is also something that you'd be Chayiv Misa if a Zar does it. Levi learned this in his Braises, Af Trumas Hadeshin. Trumas Hadeshin is also Yechayiv Misa if a Zar does it. My time of Rav. Why does Rav say it's only these 4? And Trumas Hadeshin is not included. The Chsiv, because the Pasuk, the source where it speaks about a Zar doing the Aveda, being Chayiv Misa, says as follows. So you, Aaron HaKayin, and his children should safeguard their kahuna, that they should see to it that no one else should come and do it. It says, L'chol dvar ha-mizbeach, for everything that's done in the Mizbeach, u'lemibeis la-pareiches, and inside, the other side of the pareiches, any aveda done in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, v'avadetem, and you should serve the Eibishter, avedes matana eten etz konaschem, an aveda of a gift I give you to be a Kayin, and any zar that comes and does this aveda is punishable with death. Okay, so this is the source of the pasuk where it says this halacha that a zar that does the aveda of a kayin is chayiv misa. But here, Rav points out, you see in this pasuk, it tells you exactly regarding which aveda it's referring to. Because when it says in the pasuk avedas matana, an aveda which is a matana, what does this mean? V'loy avedas siluk. Only an Aveda where you're putting something, you're giving something on the Mizbeach, that's the kind of Aveda that a Zar that does that is Chayiv Misa. But not an Aveda that consists of removing something. Right? So the Zrika of the blood, you're putting something on the Mizbeach. The Aktara, you're putting the parts of the animal on the Mizbeach. Same thing with Nisach HaMayim, Nisach HaYayin, you're pouring something on the Mizbeach. Siluk, but if you're removing, like by the ashes, if you're removing the ashes of the Mizbeach, then the Zar is not Chayiv Misa for that. Another thing Rav says, another criteria, va'avadetem, when it says there, and you will serve, what does this mean? Aveda tama. Only for an Aveda which completes something, an Aveda that completes the Aveda, that's an Aveda that a Zar is Chayiv Misa for. V'la Aveda shesh achrei Aveda. But not if it's a kind of Aveda that there's something else that follows afterwards. That's not an Aveda that you're going to be Chayiv Misa for. Okay, so for example, Rashi here says, for example, Shchita, if a Zar shechts, there's no Misa for that. Kabbalah, receiving the blood, the Hilacha, bringing the blood from one location to another. All those things are not considered to be an Aveda Tama, because it doesn't complete. Shchita, so then you need the Kabbalah Saddam. The Kabbalah, you have to do the Hilacha. When you spray the blood, that's done. You sprayed it on the Mizbeach, and there's nothing else that has to be done with the blood. And the same thing with the Haktara, the Nisach HaYayin, Nisach HaMayim. Once it's placed on the Mizbeach, it completes it. So it has to be something which completes the Aveda. The Levi, now why does Levi say that Harama Sadesha, removing the ashes, is also part of the Aveda that Azar would be Chayiv Misa for? Rabbi Rachmana, he says, because the Torah here is adding and saying, L'chol dvar ha-mizbeach, anything that's done in the Mizbeach. So by saying L'chol dvar ha-mizbeach, it comes to say, even when you remove something from the Mizbeach, even for such a thing, you're also going to be Chayiv Misa for. But as Rashi says, and we'll see soon from the Gemara, Levi will agree that it has to be a kind of an Aveda that completes, an Aveda Tama. When you remove the ashes of the Mizbeach, that's something it's completed, it's done. There's nothing else that has to be done with the ashes. However, that Levi says, because it says L'chol devar ha-mizbeach, it includes even removing something from the Mizbeach. Rav, so now according to Rav, what does he learn out from this that it says L'chol devar ha-mizbeach? According to him, this pasuk is la'asuya, comes to tell you Sheva azoya shebifnim, the 7 times that you sprinkle blood inside in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, or actually it's not in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, inside the Heichal, that it's sprinkled on the Pareiches. Right? There are certain karbanis here Rashi brings. There's a par Helem Dovar, par Mashiach, and from Yom Kippur where you spray the blood inside the Heichal. V'sheb Mitzayre, and also the Aveda of putting the oil that was placed on the Mitzayre. So those Avedas as well, it's coming to tell you that if a Zar does them, it's Chayiv Misa. That's according to Rav. But not an Aveda of removing anything. That Rav holds is not included. The Levi, according to Levi, Nafkelei. Levi says if you look here in the Pasuk, there are 2 extra words. Nafkelei midvar v'chol dvar. The Pasuk could have said Dvar HaMizbeach, and it says Kol Dvar. So when it says Dvar HaMizbeach, it comes to add even an Aveda to remove things. And then when it says Kol Dvar, it comes to add these things that Rav said, the Sheva HaZoyis, and for the Mitzayre. So according to Levi, you have 2 different drashas here. And Rav disagrees, and he says Dvar v'chol Dvar le'dorish. He doesn't split the Pasuk here into 2 different drashas. Therefore, he does not learn out that anything that is removing from the Mizbeach is also included. Now the Gemara asks on Levi's opinion. So the basis of Levi's opinion was because we have a drasha here. L'chol dvar ha-mizbeach. But the question is, why shouldn't I say as follows? L'chol dvar ha-mizbeach klal. When the pasuk first says anything done on the mizbeach, so that's all inclusive. That's a klal. And then it says avodas matana, an aveda which is a gift for you. Prat, that's already coming to say only a detail, only an Aveda, which is a matana, only placing on the Mizbeach, not removing from the Mizbeach. Now what's the rule in the way you darshan a pasuk? Klal u prat, anytime the Torah first writes a klal, and then it writes and spells out a detail, ein b'chlal ela masha b'frat. Because the Torah spelled out a certain detail, so the klal does not include more than what that detail is. Avedis matana in, so over here, because the Torah wrote the prat of Avedis matana, so we should say only an Aveda where you're putting something on the Mizbeach, that is included in this pasuk. Aveda silakloi, but any Aveda to remove from the Mizbeach, shouldn't Levi agree that should be excluded? It's a klal uprat, and it should exclude anything else. Answers the Gemara, you're right, Levi would agree to this, but Omakra, the pasuk here said, Ulemi beis la pareiches va'avadetem. It says a klal prat, but it in between this klal prat it adds ulumi beis la pareiches, right? The full pasuk there that it says is l'chol dvar hamizbeach, so that's the klal, and then it says ulumi beis la pareiches, which is inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and then it says va'avadetem avodas matana. Then comes the prat. So therefore, what we say is elmi beis la pareiches, inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, I apply this klal prat. Who the Avodas Matana, there I say, only an Avodah of giving, of placing there, that is something that a Zar will be Chayiv Misa for. V'loy Avodah Siluk. And it excludes an Avodah which is to remove. So Rashi says the Avodah that's done inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim also includes, there's an Avodah of giving and there's an Avodah of taking. What does this refer to? When you come inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim and you spray the blood over there, that's giving. Or you put down the ketairis, that's giving, putting down the ketairis. And there's the removing of the ketairis, taking it away. So the question is, if a Zar takes away the ketairis from the Kodesh HaKadoshim, will he be chayiv misa for that? So Levi will agree that inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, I will darshan this klal prat to say that it does not include the avodas siluk, because it says al mi beis la pareiches. But outside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, I don't apply this klal prat, and here I darshan the riboy of v'chol dvar hamizbeach to say that even to remove the ashes, a Zar will be chayiv misa for. So the Gemara asks on this, if so, habachutz afil avodah siluk. Okay, so this is the conclusion of what we just said. But outside, Levi's opinion is that even removing it, you're also going to be chayiv misa for this. So now the Gemara asks, if so, va'avadetem nami. What do we learn out from the word va'avadetem? Va'avadetem is teaching me that it has to be an avodah tama. Only for an avodah that is completing the avodah, that you chayiv misa for, not for an avodah that's not avodah tama. So why shouldn't we say the same thing regarding this? Elmi beis la pareiches, only inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, who the avodah tama. Here we make this distinction, that only if it's an avodah that completes, then you chayiv misa for that. V'loi avodah sheyesh achrei avodah, and it doesn't include any avodah that has another avodah that follows after that. So Rashi again explains that when you do the Aveda inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, so once you place the ketairis down on the fire That completes the Aveda. It's done. The fire, it's placed on over there. But then you have also other parts of the Aveda there. Walking in and bringing the Ketaitis to the position, bringing it to its place. And then you have to do the Aveda of Chafina. You have to take out the Ketaitis. So that's an Aveda that's not Tama. So maybe this whole distinction between an Aveda that completes and an Aveda that is not complete, that should also be a distinction only inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Habachutz, but maybe outside I should say, Afila Aveda sheyesh achrei Aveda, even when you do an Aveda that has another Aveda that follows up afterwards, like Shchita, Hailacha, or Kabbalah Saddam, over there I should say that even a Zah should be Chayiv Misa for that, even for this Aveda that's incomplete. So in other words, if Levi says that it says Elmi Beis La Pareiches, I should apply that drasha of Elmi Beis La Pareiches to both details that we mentioned. There's the detail of Avedas Matane V'loy Avedas Siluk. That distinction should be only inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And also the distinction between an Aveda that completes and an Aveda that does not complete, it should only apply inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So the Gemara answer is not as a difference. Va'avadetem hoda arvekra. Because the Torah writes Va'avadetem with a vav, so therefore I say that Va'avadetem, the Torah is mixing it in, and the Torah is saying that this applies back to the Aveda of the Mizbeach, which is outside. Right? In other words, the difference over here is, it says Va'avadetem, and then it says in the Pasuk Avedas Matana. So regarding Va'avadetem, there's a vav. Regarding Avedas Matana, there is no vav. So therefore, regarding Avodas Matana, I say that applies only inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That over there, inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, I make a distinction if it's an Aveda of Matana or an Aveda of Siluk. But Va'avadetem, because of the added Vav, I say that it goes back to what it said before, L'chol Dvar HaMizbeach, that even outside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, only an Aveda, which is Aveda Tama, as a Zar Chayiv Misa for, but not an Aveda that's not an Aveda Tama. Now Rav asked the question, Avedas Siluk Behechel, an Aveda that's done inside the Heichel to remove something. What's going to be the halach over there? Mahu. What's the din? So we spoke about Kodesh Kadashim. In the Kodesh HaKadoshim, an Aveda of removing, you won't be Chayiv Misa for. Outside, according to Levi, even if you're removing the ashes, you will be Chayiv Misa for. But what's inside the Heichel? That we didn't speak about. So do I say lefnim edaminale? Do I compare an aveda that's done inside the heichel to an aveda that's done inside the kodesh hakadoshim? Or I compare it to an aveda that's done in the mizbeach outside. So Rashi over here says, what's the aveda inside the heichel of removing inside the heichel? For example, cleaning out the mizbeach hapnimi, cleaning out the menorah, those kinds of avedas. What's going to be the halacha there? Hodar Pashta, after Rav asked this question, so he answered, Mi base, the Torah could have said Mi base, and instead it says Uli mi base, when it says that in the Pasuk there, Uli mi base la pareiches. So because it says the added Uli mi base, I say that it includes also the Heichel, that whatever is inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and whatever is inside the Heichel, you're not going to be Chayiv Misa if it's an Aveda of Siluk, not for removing, only for putting, placing down, giving. So now the Gemara asks the question, so Elamata, if so what is that? What should this mean? Zar, shesideres ha-shulchan, if a Zar comes and does the Aveda and he sets up the shulchan with the lechem aponim on it, l'chayiv, he should be chayiv misa for this, because inside the heichel, any Aveda that you do, you should be chayiv misa for. You're not chayiv if you remove, but you should be chayiv if you're placing down. So the question over here is, on Amud Aleph we said that there's only 4 Avedas that you chayiv misa for. Zrika, Ktara, Nisach HaMayim, and Nisach HaYayim. But why aren't you chayiv misa for placing the bread on the shulchan? Answers the Gemara, because that's not an Aveda that completes it. It's not Aveda Tama. Why not? Ikesidu bezichen. After you put down the bread, there's something else that has to be done. You have to put down the bezichen, which is the frankincense that was put there. So the Gemara asks, okay, so if so, Siddur bezichen lechayiv, if a Zar comes and puts down those bezichen, he should be chayiv. So the Gemara answers, that's also not the end of the Aveda. Ikesiluk v'aktara. Then afterwards, every Shabbos, they would take off the lechem aponim, and then you have to take off the bezichen and burn it on the mizbeach. So that is the completion of the Aveda. So therefore, that we already mentioned before. The haktara, we already mentioned before that a Zar would be chayiv. But now the Gemara asks another question. Zar shesidis ha-menorah, how about a zar that prepared the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash inside the Heichal, l'chayiv? Why don't we count that as an avodah that the zar should be chayiv for? Answers the Gemara, because that's also not the end of the avodah. How does he prepare it? You have to take out the lamps and clean it out and put back in the lamps, but that's not enough. Ikin is seen as psila. After you put the lamps back into the menorah, you're not done. You have to put the wicks in afterwards. So it's not the end of the avodah. But frekt the Gemara, nasan psila l'chayiv. So if so, how about if you place the wicks inside? That's completing the avodah. That's preparing the menorah. You should be chayiv for that. So the Gemara says that's also not the end. Ikin is seen as shemen. You still have to add the oil. Frekt the Gemara, nasan shemen l'chayiv. If so, if you place the oil inside the menorah, you should be chayiv for that. Says the Gemara, but that's also not the end. Ikad loke. You have to light the menorah, and that's what you're chayiv for. So the Gemara says, so if so, hidlik l'chayiv, lighting the menorah, a zar should be chayiv for. Why didn't we count it before? So here the Gemara says, hadloke lav aveidahi. Lighting the menorah is not considered to be an aveidah. And the reason is, the Mefarshim say, as Rashi explained it over here, that when you light the menorah, it's something that you light it, you have to put the flame to the wick of the menorah in a second. It immediately catches on fire, and that's not considered to be a whole aveda, of something that you have to do of any effort. And therefore it's not called an aveda. So for that, the zar is not chayiv misa for. The Taisus Rid here actually says that this is the reason why in Parshas Baal Loischa, when it speaks about the mitzvah of lighting the menorah, it says it like a story, that it will happen. It doesn't say it as a mitzvah that he should light, it just says it when you will light the menorah, because really a zar is allowed to light the menorah as well. It's not part of an aveda because it lights so quickly that it's not considered to be an aveda in the Beis HaMikdash. Fragt the Gemara, v'loi, lighting the menorah is not an aveda? But Vatanya, we learned regarding another case of lighting a fire in the Beis HaMikdash. It says regarding the fire in the Mizbeach. They placed the fire on the Mizbeach. And they set up the wood on the Mizbeach. So what does this teach me? It says two times over here about putting the fire. Limit, this teaches me ala tzasas alisa, when you light the fire of a twig of wood or like a chip of wood in order to be able to light the Mizbeach, that should be done only with a kohen that's kosher. So you have to light a twig, and then you use that to light the Mizbeach. That has to be done by a kohen kosher, or b'kli sharis, and it has to be done through a kli sharis. Right? Which means, Rashi says, it means that the kohen has to wear all of his big day kahuna. That's what it's referring to. So what do we see over here? Lighting the chip of wood or a twig in order to light the Mizbeach is called an aveda. So why shouldn't I say the same thing, that lighting the menorah is considered to be an aveda? So the Gemara answers, it's not the same thing. Hatzasas alisa, lighting this twig of wood, aveidahi, that is an aveda. But adlok lav aveidahi, to light the menorah, that's not considered to be an aveda. So here, as I mentioned before, the Taisus Yishanim says the reason is because when you light a twig of wood, that takes more effort. It takes time for it to catch on fire. But when you light a wick, you just put the flame to the wick and it immediately goes on fire. Frag the Gemara. So now, coming back over here to the Aveda outside by the Mizbeach, Elo meyato, Zar shesideres hamaroche, a zar that came and set up the place where the maroche, the wood on the Mizbeach, l'chayev, we should be chayev for that as well, because that's an Aveda that's completed. And it's also an Aveda of matana, of placing something on the Mizbeach. So why would a zar not be chayev for that? Answers the Gemara that no, that's not an Aveda that's fully completed. After you set up the wood, there's another 2 logs of wood that have to be placed there. So there's another thing that you're doing. Fragt the Gemara, Siddur Shnei Gzirim L'chayiv. So after you place the 2 logs of wood, a zar that does that should be chayiv because that completes the job. Answers the Gemara, no, that doesn't complete it either. Ikke Siddur Eivarim. What really completes it is when you place the parts on the wood to burn on the Mizbeach. It's not just placing the logs. That's not a point for itself. The main thing is afterwards that you put the parts on the Mizbeach. And that we counted before, the Haktara, that a zar would be chayiv for that. Fragte Gemara, what Ravasi Rav Yochanan. Ravasi said in the name of Rav Yochanan that zar shesid shnei gizreitzim chayiv. A zar that puts the 2 logs of wood on the Mizbeach is chayiv for that. So we see that this is considered to be an Aveda, that it's fully completed, and you're placing something on the Mizbeach, and Rabbi Yochanan says you are chayiv. So here, this is actually a machlokes. The Gemara says, you're right, there's a machlokes here, and Baha pligi. This is the machlokes between Rav, that did not include this case, and Rabbi Yochanan. Mar Savar, Rabbi Yochanan's opinion is, Aveda Tami, putting down the logs of wood, that completes the Aveda. You prepared the wood and the Mizbeach, it's done. Whatever's going to be burnt afterwards on the Mizbeach is not part of this, it's a separate thing. Mar Savar, Rav's opinion is, Lav Aveda Tamihi. It's not a completed Aveda, because even after you prepared all the wood of the Mizbeach, the whole point of the wood is to burn the karbanis. So not until you burn the karbanis on the Mizbeach is it considered to be complete. Tanya, like the Gemara we learned in the Braise, Kevosei the Rav, and Tanya, Kevosei the Levi. So we go back to the main machlokes we started here, whether removing the ashes, the Aramas Adeshen, is that something a Zar is Chayiv Misa for or not? So we have a Braise like Rav, and we have a Braise like Levi. Tanya, Kevosei the Rav, in one Braise it says like Rav, so it says in the Braise, Avedis Shazar Chayiv Alein Misa, the following are the Avedis that a Zar would be Chayiv Misa, Zrikas Dam, spraying the blood in the Mizbeach, Bein Lifnim, whether it's inside, in the Heichal, Ben Lefnai V'Lefnim, inside in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, V'hamazeh B'chata Sa'oif, spraying the blood from the Chata Sa'oif, which is counted separately because it's not sprayed from a vessel, it's sprayed directly from the bird itself. V'hamematzeh, and also when you squeeze out the blood on the Mizbeach from a bird. V'hamakter Ba'ila Sa'oif, and burning the parts of the Eila Sa'oif on the Mizbeach. V'hamenasech, Shloisha Lugim Mayim, and pouring the 3 lugim of water on the Mizbeach. Shloisha Lugim Yayin, and pouring the wine on the Mizbeach. So this is a Braisa exactly like Rav, because it does not mention removing the ashes. Tanya Kavasei the Levi, but in another Braisa we learned like Levi, Avaydais, Shazar Chayiv Alein Misa. These are the Avodas that Azar is Chayiv Misa for them. And the first thing it mentions is Hameida Misadeshem, removing the ashes, exactly like Levi said. And then it says V'sheva Azoyis Shebifnim, and when you spray the blood inside, Shebim Mitzayra, and the oil that's placed on the Mitzayra, V'hamayla al Gabe Mizbeach, and when you bring onto the Mizbeach the parts to be burnt in the Mizbeach, and here in this price it says Bein Dova Kosher, that includes a carbon that was good, that's kosher, a Bein Dova Apostle. And it also includes bringing onto the Mizbeach a carbon that's apostle. Rashi adds and clarifies that's only a carbon that became possible in Kodesh, not a carbon that was possible from before. Because the halacha is, a carbon that became possible in Kodesh, once you brought it up, you leave it on the Mizbeach. So therefore, a Zar that does that would be Chayiv Misa. Okay, that concludes this sugya. Let's learn one more piece over here. The Gemara goes back to the Mishnah. What did it say in the Mishnah? The Bachir actually adds a quote from the Mishnah. In the Mishnah it said, Arba Payasas HaYisham. They made a lottery for the Avedis of the Kainim and the Beis HaMikdash, 4 different lotteries. So the Gemara asks, Lama Mefisin, why are we making these lotteries? So the Gemara says, Lama Mefisin, you're asking a question, why we make the lotteries? Kedam Maran, like we've already explained. That's because there were fights, or because there was a problem, so they instituted to make these lotteries. Ella, the question is, Lama Mefaisin v'chayzirun Mefaisin. Why are we doing this 4 times? Why can't we include all the Avedis in one geidel? Rabbi Yochanan answered, Kidei lahargish kol azara, in order to get the excitement and all the azara that the Kainim gather and then they disperse and they come and gather again 4 times. Shenema, the pasuk says, Asher yachtav namtik seid beveis elikim nahalech beragesh, that in the Beis HaMikdash you should walk with excitement and create excitement. So therefore they made this geidel 4 different times that people had an opportunity to come and to win their part in their aveda for the day.